Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America and Perfect Building Maintenance, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Metal Products, New York's Window Company, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Siami, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Muss Development, Newmark Knight Frank, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, The Moynihan Group, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. You know, there are people who change New York City in a variety of ways. There are people who build buildings, but I've never had anyone who's really built a museum, who's created the largest museum of Himalayan art in the world. And today I'm fortunate to have Don Rubin, the founder and co-founder and chairman of the Rubin Museum of Art, and also the former chairman of Multiplan. Thank you for coming today. So, you know, it's interesting. You know, I always like native New Yorkers, guys who grew up in the city who have interesting stories, and you truly have interesting stories. You were born in January of 1935. You're going to be 75 years of age. You were born somewhere in New York City. You weren't sure, but you said to me, as a kid, you used to have to travel up to Boston. Before I do that, maybe I should tell them, your father came over in 1921, came from Poland. And he came over, and then he went up to Boston to be an upholsterer. And then when you were born, he was back in New York at this time, and he was a union organizer, correct?
Yes.
So, and your father was the person who was instrumental, and he created the Hotel Workers Council and the Hotel Workers Union. But because he was a union organizer, it created a little grief for you and the family, right?
A little bit.
So what happened? You went to Boston?
At that time, my father went to Boston. He was the vice president of the upholsterers local up there, and he met my mother. And then he came back when she was pregnant and came back to New York, and I was born in 1935. But my father was fairly left-wing, and there was a Food Workers Industrial Union that he headed up, which later merged with the AFL-CIO. And the restaurant workers and the restaurants were very much controlled by the Lepke and the Dutch Schultz mob. And they had a contract out to kill my father, made it very clear to him that they were going to assassinate them. And they sent me to live with my grandmother in Boston for 6 months because they were going from apartment to apartment to avoid that. My dad worked with Governor Dewey when he was district attorney, and eventually assisted as much as he could in the indictment of the remnants of these mob guys, and they went to the can.
But you had an interesting time growing up. So it was Boston, then you came back to New York, and then a couple of years you were upstate near Ossining, right?
Yes.
At a camp, at a school with Jewish kids. And then you came back to Dalton. How was Dalton? That was an interesting 3 years of your life.
It was good. It was a very interesting thing. I love Dalton. It's wonderful. We have an arrangement with Dalton for the museum now. We work with their kids as part of the art program with high schools. But Dalton was a very interesting experience. I think the most interesting experience I had was that my sixth grade English teacher was Priscilla Hiss, and that was Alger Hiss's wife. And when the pumpkin papers came out, she submitted a resignation, and the faculty and the Parents Association refused the resignation at that time. And one of the parents, Buttonwieser, Peter Buttonwieser, was a classmate. His father was at one time the Assistant High Commissioner to Germany after the war. And they were very wealthy, Wall Street people with a huge townhouse. And they gave her and her son, a floor in the townhouse during this tragedy of justice.
So after that, you didn't finish at Dalton. You finished somewhere else. Where did you graduate high school from?
The problem at Dalton at that time, after the ninth grade, beginning of the ninth grade, it was only girls. Now that's co-ed.
That's right.
So I went to Hessian Hills. I went to
Stockbridge?
No, before Stockbridge, I went to Elizabeth Irwin, which was the Little Red Schoolhouse High School. And I went there for the ninth year, but my folks were so busy working on union politics that I never saw them, and so I used to have macaroni with Campbell's tomato soup for dinner.
So you graduated high school at 17, and then you decided to hitchhike for a little time, right?
I didn't know what I was going to do.
Yeah, because you didn't even apply to college.
I didn't even apply, So when I came back. I hitchhiked to California, had a great time. I came back, and then my parents, independently, not together, because I don't remember them ever being together, brought me down to a place on 42nd Street that was a college advisory service. And I had the fantasy that I would spend 1 year in each area of the country. But there's a conspiracy in the college and university field that Harvard doesn't take Yale's credits. So it took me 6 years. So I decided to spend 4 years in Georgia.
So you went to Oglethorpe?
Yeah, Oglethorpe.
Right, and you spent 4 years in Atlanta, and you graduate Oglethorpe, and then you get your first job working for the milk workers?
Now, my first job was working for 6 weeks at Grand Central Station.
In the
evening with mailbags over Christmas. And then I got a job after that as a longshoreman.
Oh, so the longshoreman.
Yes, I worked on the Grace Line piers.
Well, there aren't too many Jewish longshoremen.
I was the only one. I was with an Irish gang. The longshoremen at that time, before they had containers, we had lunch because they would break in and open up a can of ham or a can of something, and we would eat there. And it was a very exciting period of my life. And I blew up my Coast Guard pass with my picture. I looked like it. I very much, when people look at it today, they said I look like Marlon Brando.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Truly on the waterfront. So then you go to work for the milk workers.
No, I went to the National Maritime Union.
No.
I went to the 584. Yeah, 584.
And there you meet this legendary short little guy, Max.
Max Liebler, who's a Jewish guy, 5'2".
Tell the story. That's a really good story. I like that.
I was brought in by the trustee. I forget the New York lawyer, to work in the office doing all the research and putting the papers together. And Joe Kelly ran the local. It still exists. And Max Liebler, who was a little Jewish guy, we used to hang around the office. But the story is, and I heard it directly from Max, that the mob guy, the reason there was a trusteeship, the mob guys came in on 14th Street and 8th Avenue, the 9th floor. They hung him out the window, and they said, Max, turn over the local to us. One guy on one foot, one guy on the other foot. And he just said, F you, drop me.
And
they brought it in. They brought him back in. If I may add to that story, because there's a story I didn't tell you about it. One of our foundation gave a grant to a Catholic priest at Loyola in New Orleans. And we funded him to do ethics seminars for Teamster Union officials. And we did one at in Queens in that big hotel, and with 40 Teamster local secretary. It was just maybe 7, 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And he gave the talk, and he was talking about Thomas Aquinas and phenomenology, and they didn't understand a word. But they were there for absolution. They weren't there, you know, they figured if they were there and they took this course, it would protect them from
it's
any...
37 Hail Marys, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so he asked me to say a few words, and I told him, I said, all this is a lot of bull. The real story is Max Liebler. It is not learning ethics in a book. It's when somebody has one guy on one leg and one guy on the other leg and is about to drop you. And then you say, drop me, because I'm not going to give in to you.
So you learned well.
Yes. So a guy gets up and he says, I am the secretary treasurer of that local. I was a shop chairman at the time, and everything Rubin is saying is true.
About Liebler.
Liebler.
So now you go to the Army Reserve?
For 6 months.
You go to Army Reserve, Fort Dix, and then you spend your time on 42nd Street like the rest of us Army Reservists.
Terrible.
And then you get a job with the NAU, the
NMU,
National Maritime
Union,
which is still alive, and the health and welfare benefits,
Yes.
which really relates to Multiplan.
Yeah.
And they're part of the things, and I think it's a very interesting story that, because you wrote something, you were on the Long John Neville show, going back, about the funerals.
One of the things that I had is seamen, maritime workers, and they had a union of 30,000. They run away from home in Kansas and California and Peru, wherever it is, and some of them drop dead in New York. And my job as a 23-year-old, I was working for a guy named Abe Magrisso. Our job was to arrange for funerals. And I arranged for funerals for probably about 30 guys. And then we wrote together. He was a very good writer, much better than I am, or was. And we wrote an article for the NMU pilot, which was and it won second prize.
High Cost of Dying?
High Cost of Dying. And then it was picked up
By the UPI?
Yeah, it first went to the IUD Digest, and then it was picked up from there by the UPI. And we were quoted in the bestseller by Jessica Mitford, The American Way of Death, and there was another book, The High Cost of Dying. And I was very much involved with the co-op movement and the Jewish co-op movement. There was a huge Jewish co-op movement for funerals at the time.
Mm. So after the Maritime Union, you go to work for the Pocketbook Workers Union, where you also continue in the health and welfare.
Yes.
For about 7 years. And then it was time, you said, hey, look, you know, I know this health and welfare things, and you really, I think the turning point, because it relates to Multiplan, is you're in Puerto Rico. Yeah. And you meet someone, and he hires you to represent his health and welfare plan.
Yes, it was Sam Myers. He ran a union of 4,000 people. We were in the same hotel. We were both spending time with Bob Alpert, who used to work for my dad. And we're in the hotel, and he starts telling me my union welfare fund has this very big problem. We have to pay 25% more than Blue Cross would pay. And you're so smart, you know so much about healthcare, you know so much about the unions, you know how to negotiate. I want you to come work for me. You didn't say the union or the welfare, for me. Come work for me, and we will, you know.
And that was, in reality, that he and your second client created Don Rubin and Company, yeah. And then later on you created Multiplan.
Yes.
And Multiplan is the largest preferred provider organization network in America, which you sold later on. But before that, you know, it was you and your wife Shelley who created Multiplan, and it really grew. But before that, I apologize because we didn't talk about HIP.
Yes.
You were working for HIP for a couple of years.
I worked for HIP for 3 years. I was the associate director of the medical department.
Let's get to what you did in Multiplan, which was interesting. How Multiplan helped the companies because they weren't getting discounts like Blue Cross.
what happened is when I was working, then I ended up with about 10 or 15 different locals in the city, Bill Michelson and a number of others, and I went to the hospitals, many of whom I knew because of my relationships
Going
before.
back from the health world. Yeah.
And they said, why should I give you a discount? I have to legislatively give it to Blue Cross. So I went back to the funds and I said, just sit on the bills. Put them in the lower left drawer, and about a year from now, we're going to start getting calls, and I'll settle them a claim at a time at 30 or 40% discount or 20% discount, and we'll just sit there. And so I just sat, the lower left-hand drawer was the question, and I would go from Union Welfare Fund to Union Welfare Fund, and eventually they got wise. Some hospitals took 6 or 7 years to get wise, and we would negotiate a contract.
And subsequently, you built this unbelievable business, which you sold to Carlisle a number of years ago. But in the interim, and this relates to how you created the art business, you said when you and Shelley were first married, you never really knew anything about art, but you went out and bought pictures. You bought all these paintings, and this is even before you sold the company to Carlisle. You and Shelley were taking a car ride at the old Barneys building. And what happened?
I was driving by to meet Shelley at Lincoln Center, and it said bankruptcy auction. And I wrote down the number. It took me 2 weeks to get in. It's a beautiful building. It's a most beautiful building in New York. We were looking for space for 2 years. We had a collection of 1,000 or so paintings, 500 at Multiplan on the walls. We had 60,000 square feet of art. And I wrote down the number. It took 2 weeks to get in. I took the elevator to the top floor, beautiful spiral Art Deco staircase. It was filthy and dirty and obscenities.
Originally it was tenements originally, and then the Pressman family made it the original Barneys, and then they made it the Barneys for women and.
When I walked down the staircase, and Mitch Roth, who now works for the museum, he was showing me the building, and I said, Mitch, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy the building. I've looked for 2 years for space. And he said, you're crazy. It's going to be bought by somebody who's going to put up condos. That's all the people that are seeing it. I said, the only thing I need is Shelley to say yes. I want to get her here. It took 2 more weeks before the auction. And I took Shelley up, and if I tried to convince her, I would be in deep trouble. I didn't say a word. We got to the bottom of the spiral staircase, and she looked at me and she said, with 2 thumbs up, she said, let's go for it.
And you buy the building.
Yes.
But the building took a little time to renovate. How many years did it take?
It took 6. I had the thought I could do it in 2. It takes the architect 2 years to get even the preliminary plans together.
But and how much? I mean, you bought the building for what? 17 million?
It was 22.
22 million, and how much money was put in to build this museum?
There was probably another 20 or so.
But it finally opened in what? 2005, 2006?
Yeah, something like that.
And today, how much art is there?
We have less art than I had at Multiplan, but we're doing great exhibits.
Right, you're traveling.
World class. We're traveling them. We have a Jung show, the first showing of the Red Book. We have a very great Indian Jain show with a catalog. We have a mandala show with a catalog.
But you were also mentioning, let's talk about the traveling shows that you bring the art where. You said you've gone out to Oglethorpe. Where you went
that's my own collection. We have 65 Cuban paintings at Oglethorpe now, modern Cuban paintings. That's where I graduated from. This is privately. Another board member and I have 10 each at Hofstra Museum. And then we're going to have 3 original artworks for North Vietnamese posters that I bought 15 years ago. The artwork for the beautiful posters, some anti-Chinese, some anti-America, they're going to be in the Queens Museum in March.
So besides the work and the museum today, you and Shelley have the foundation.
We have, yes.
And the foundation is doing what type of projects?
Can I give you 3 of them?
I'd love you to.
One of them, it's a project called Music in Memory. And we bought 200 iPods, Apple at the time for $49, now they're $59. And we had one person out there part-time asking the patients and the families. The key is asking the families what music they like.
Right, for Alzheimer's, right.
For Alzheimer's or stroke. And they have come to life because while they can't remember who you are or what their thoughts were, they could remember the music. And we have some videos that we're shooting now of them coming to life. And the staff, they remember it. And it's like you're talking about medicine. If you put in hospitals and nursing homes, personally, music similar to this, it would be better than medicine.
Right. Then there's another program that you do, you know, because of all the great work that your father and you've done in the labor movement, is with the kids, the writers program, right?
Yes, we do. Those I described for the hotel workers, but the two others we did. We came up the idea for the Big Apple Circus to do something called Circupedia, which we funded. So it's not just for the Big Apple Circus. If you look on the website, Circupedia, you will see circus acts, history, memorabilia, and it's growing. It's like Wikipedia growing. And the last one, which is a signature piece that I don't have more time than to do it, we have created with an architect a manual on how to build a house in the third world, which is earthquake resistant. And it's a very large manual with pictures, how to do it, and it's going to be published by the International Code Council, which is the council that does building codes. So it's a little diverse.
Now, you have two daughters?
I have three daughters.
Three daughters, and your present daughter is at Yale.
Yes.
In Yale Law School. Now, if you had a say in your life, who were your mentors?
My mentors were a guy named Bill Newchow, Sam Myers, who I described. Billy Newchow was a Jewish labor leader in the Teamsters who had a very big influence on my life.
Why?
Because he was he knew everybody. He was very helpful to me. We were best friends, and you know, when we were in the funeral, the mayor of New York, on his last day in office,
he was there.
He was there.
And needless to say, your dad, who,
yes.
You know, a legend in his time. But as you said, you know, most people call them Dad. Yeah. Your father, who was originally Julius, you called Jay. My
parents said, call them Molly and Jay. We don't want to have any other thing than Molly and Jay. It wasn't coming from me, it was coming from them.
Right. And, you know, you were saying to me, which was an interesting story, your dad died in 1990. Yeah. Your mother died just a couple of years ago. And she didn't like the fact that you became a capitalist, right? She didn't like it. She was an old left-winger in the politics. I don't think she belonged to anything. She was also in the union. Yeah, also in the movement, labor movement. Yeah, labor movement. And I would visit her once a week. I bought in a co-op for her. And I would visit her once a week. And the only way I could get a reaction, I had three women who rotated taking care of her because I didn't want to put her in a nursing home. And I would say as loud as I could, as close as I could get to her, Molly, your son is a capitalist, a capitalist, a capitalist. And then I see her shaking a little bit. But you know, it's interesting. The son is a capitalist, but what you and Shelley have done, you know, with this magnificent museum, you know, which you do a lot. I mean, you have these special programs where you provide for CUNY students a special admission program and for the general public. And what you've done with the foundation and working is interesting. And truly, you know, there is no question that your life has truly been a builder of New York. Thank you. And I'd like to thank you today. Good. Thank you.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America and Perfect Building Maintenance, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Metal Products, New York's Window Company, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Sciami, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Muss Development, Newmark Knight Frank, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, The Moynihan Group, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund.